I want to tell you about a woman named Dorothy, and I want you to stay with her even when it gets hard, because it will get hard before it gets anything else." Dorothy stood in courtroom 4 of the Hargrove County Courthouse on a Thursday morning in February, wearing the only dress she still owned. It was navy blue, bought at a Goodwill in Macon 11 years ago. Slightly too large at the shoulders now, because she had lost weight she hadn't had to spare. Her hands were folded in front of her. Her public defender, a young man named Carter, who had met her for the first time 40 minutes earlier and smelled of coffee and apology, stood to her left. The judge was shuffling papers. He hadn't looked up yet. He was young, younger than Dorothy had expected when she'd heard the bailiff say, "The Honorable James Aldrich," with dark hair going silver at the temples and a jaw that was sharp in the particular way that some men's jaws are, the kind that photographs well and ages slowly. He wore the black robe with the ease of someone who had been wearing it long enough to forget it was there. His hands were steady on the papers. Dorothy watched those hands. She knew those hands. Not these hands exactly. Not the hands of a 41-year-old man in a judge's robe in a county courthouse in Georgia. But the shape of them. The particular length of the fingers. The way the left thumb moved slightly when he concentrated. A small unconscious habit that she had watched, once in another life, for hours at a time. She watched him read. She watched the stillness of him, the economy of his movement, the way he held himself like a man accustomed to rooms going quiet when he entered. She thought, his father sat like that. Then she corrected herself, because it wasn't accurate. His father had never sat like anything, had never been still enough to sit like anything. The judge looked up to read the charge. His eyes found her face. The gavel slipped. It didn't fall. He caught it before it left the bench, the reflex of a man who controls his hands for a living. But it slipped, and in 30 years on the bench, which he hadn't had, he was 41. But in however many years he had been doing this, Dorothy guessed that gavel had never slipped before. She knew his eyes before she knew his name. She had last seen them the night she left him on Ruth Kavanaugh's porch, wrapped in a green blanket that had a small tear at the corner that she had meant to mend. He had been 18 months old. His eyes had been the same then. Dark, with that quality of attention that some children have, the ones who seem to be solving something when they look at you. That was 39 years ago. But to understand what happened in courtroom 4 on a Thursday morning in February, I need to take you back to a night in October in 1984 in a town called Mill Haven, Georgia, and to a 23-year-old woman who made the worst and best decision of her life on a neighbor's porch in the dark. Dorothy Jean Marsh had grown up in Mill Haven the way a lot of girls grew up in small Georgia towns in the 60s and 70s, with not much and making do with it, in a family where love was a thing people showed through presence and labor and not a lot of words. Her mother, Vera, had worked the register at a feed store for 22 years. Her father, Earl, had done various things and mostly not done them well, and had been gone by the time Dorothy was 12 in the way that certain fathers are gone. Not a dramatic departure, just a slow erosion until one day he wasn't there anymore, and nobody was surprised. Dorothy had been a good student in the way that good students are when they are smart and poor and understand, earlier than they should, that school is the only available ladder. She had wanted to be a nurse. She had said so at 17 to her guidance counselor, who had said, "That's a fine goal," with the tone of a man filing something under unlikely. She had believed it anyway. Then she had met Bobby Aldrich. Bobby was from a town 2 counties over, 25 years old when she was 19, with the kind of easy confidence that reads as charm before you learn to read it as something else. He drove a truck. He laughed at things in a way that made you feel included. He told Dorothy she was the smartest woman he'd ever met, which at 19, coming from someone who seemed to know something about the world, felt like a fact rather than a line. She married him at 20. She was pregnant at 21. She named the baby James, after her grandfather, because Bobby said he didn't care what they called him, which she understood at the time as easygoing and understood later as a different thing entirely. What Bobby Aldrich was, in the plain language that Dorothy took years to find and more years to use, was a man who hurt people when he felt like it and didn't when he didn't, and who had arranged his life so that no one outside the walls of their particular house on Calloway Street knew which one was happening on any given day. He was well liked in Millhaven. He helped neighbors with their cars. He coached Little League for 2 seasons. He was, in the way of certain people, genuinely good company. And then he would come home, and the door would close, and Dorothy would understand again that the person the town knew and the person she lived with were not exactly the same person. She left him twice before James was born, came back twice because she had nowhere to go that was not her mother's house, and her mother's house had its own complications, and because Bobby was sorry both times with a specificity and a tenderness that she believed. She understood now, at 62, that believing it was not stupidity. It was the entirely rational response of a person whose options were genuinely limited, and whose alternative was a kind of alone that is harder than most people who haven't been in it can understand. James was born in the summer of 1983. He was a calm baby, not the kind that people describe as easy, exactly, but the kind that seemed to be paying attention to things, always, with those dark eyes tracking whatever was in front of him. Dorothy nursed him and sang to him and learned his particular rhythms the way mothers learn the rhythms of their children when they have nobody else to talk to. Bobby was better for a while after James was born. Then he was worse. The year that James turned 1, Dorothy understood something that she had been working up to understanding for a long time. That the house on Calloway Street was going to kill her eventually, in one way or another, and that if she was in the house when that happened, James would be there too. She also understood something else, something that she had tried very hard not to understand, and that kept presenting itself with a persistence she could no longer refuse. She was using, had been using, for 8 months, the thing that had started as a way to get through and had become the thing she needed to get through anything. In 1984, in a small Georgia town, there was not a lot of language for what she was experiencing, and not a lot of infrastructure for getting out of it. There was shame, which she had plenty of. There was the awareness that she was becoming someone her child should not be raised by. And there was the awareness, which arrived one morning while James was sleeping, and she was standing in the kitchen in the particular clarity of early morning, that she had a choice to make, and that one of the choices was going to cost her everything. She spent 3 weeks making it. She did not tell Bobby. She did not tell her mother, who would have tried to help in ways that would have made it impossible. She called Ruth Kavanaugh, who lived 4 houses down, and who had brought a casserole when James was born, and who had once, in a conversation that Dorothy had not forgotten, said, "You know you can always knock," with a directness that Dorothy had understood and filed away. She knocked on Ruth's door on a Tuesday night in October, with James on her hip, and the green blanket, and a bag with his things in it, and nothing for herself. Ruth opened the door, looked at Dorothy, looked at James, did not ask questions. "I need you to keep him," Dorothy said. "I need you to keep him, and I need you to call the county, and I need you to tell them I left him. Not that I'm coming back, that I left him." She paused. "I need you to tell them that." Ruth looked at her for a long time. "Dorothy, if they think I'm coming back, they'll wait. I need them to start the process. I need him to go somewhere safe before Bobby figures out I'm gone." She shifted James on her hip. He was looking at her with those eyes. "Please." Ruth took James. Dorothy kissed him once, on the forehead, with the deliberateness of someone who knows they are making a memory that will have to last. She did not let herself linger. She had learned in the preceding 3 weeks that there was a kind of pain that you could not feel all at once, or it would stop you entirely, and that the only way through it was to move before you felt it. She put James in Ruth's arms, wrapped the green blanket around him, the one with the small tear at the corner that she hadn't mended. She turned. She walked down the porch steps. She did not look back. She had decided she would not look back, and she kept that decision with the same discipline she had used to make all the other decisions of that night, which was the discipline of someone who has used up every available resource on a single choice and has nothing left for anything else. She walked until she reached the highway. Then she kept walking. She was gone from Millhaven for 39 years, not all at once. The first leaving was the hardest and longest, the years in which she was too far down to come up, and then slowly coming up, and then trying to stay up, and sometimes failing and getting back up again. This is not a story about addiction in the way that stories about addiction are sometimes told, with the drama foregrounded and the person reduced to what happened to them. What happened to Dorothy in those years was real, and it was hard, and there is no version of telling it honestly that makes it simple. She got clean. She got not clean. She got clean again. She stayed clean this time, the fourth time when she was 31, in a program in Savannah run by a woman named Sister Margaret, who had a face like judgment and a voice like patience, and who told Dorothy on the first day, "I don't need you to want to get better. I need you to want to. Dorothy had wanted to want to. It was enough to start. She stayed in Savannah for 12 years, worked at a laundry, then at a diner, then at a dry cleaner on Waters Avenue, where the owner, Mr. Park, paid her fairly and asked few questions, and once, when she was sick, left soup outside her apartment door without mentioning it afterward. She lived simply. She sent money, when she had it, which was not always, to Ruth Kavanaugh in Millhaven, with notes that said only thank you and nothing else, because she did not know what else to say, and because she had no right, she believed, to ask for information. Ruth had cashed the money orders for 11 years and then stopped cashing them, which Dorothy understood to mean that Ruth had died. She mourned Ruth with the particular grief of someone mourning a person who gave them something they could never repay and now could never try. She did not search for James. She had made herself a rule about this in the years after Savannah, when she sometimes had access to the internet and to search tools that had not existed in 1984. The rule was, you left him so he could have something you couldn't give him. Looking for him is for you, not for him. And you don't get to do things for you at his expense anymore. She held the rule. It cost her, held it anyway. The years after Savannah were harder. She moved. She worked when she could find work, which got harder as she got older, and as the gaps in her employment history became harder to explain, and as the record, which she had accumulated across 2 states over many years. Small offenses mostly, the kind that attach themselves to a life lived at the bottom of things, as the record made certain doors harder to open. She was 62 years old, and she had been trying to hold it together in Hargrove County for 3 years when the check-cashing place on Decatur Street became the thing that put her in front of a judge. She had not planned it. She had not planned most of the things that had shaped her life. She had needed money, and she had made a bad choice, and the bad choice had a consequence, and the consequence had a number attached to it that the young public defender had told her, quietly, was likely to be substantial, given her record. She had stood in the holding area that morning and thought, this is where it ends up. This is the last station. She had not thought, the judge will be my son. She had not thought that because it was not a thing you could think. It was a thing that happened to you in a courtroom, and then you had to figure out what to do with it. Before we go further, because this story is about to turn into something that I think is going to stay with you for a long time, I want to take just a moment. If you're here, if you've made it this far with Dorothy, you already know this one is different. Please subscribe and turn on the bell. YouTube doesn't push every story to every subscriber, and this channel is where I'll keep bringing you stories like this one. Hit like if you're feeling something right now, and leave me a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read them. I also want to be honest with you. Channels like this one get demonetized without warning, which makes it genuinely hard to keep doing this work at this level. If you want to support what we're doing in a real way, there's something in the description and the pinned comment that's worth your time. Quality material that supports the channel and gives you something to keep. We're grateful for every person who's been able to help. Now, back to courtroom 4, where a gavel had just slipped from a judge's hand, and where Dorothy Jean Marsh was standing in a navy dress waiting to find out if her son was going to sentence her to 18 years. James Aldrich had been adopted at age 2 by a couple named Harold and Susan Aldrich from Valdosta, Georgia. No relation to Bobby, just the coincidence of a name that had followed him through paperwork and stayed. Harold was a high school principal. Susan taught piano lessons in their living room. They were good people. Dorothy had no information about them for most of her life and had constructed them as good people because it was the only version she could survive, and then had learned eventually that she had been right. They had raised James in Valdosta with the stability and attention of people who understood they had been given something that came with a weight they were responsible for honoring. James had known from early on that he was adopted. Harold and Susan had told him at age 5 with a directness that he would later describe as the kindest thing anyone had ever done for him. The decision to give him the truth early enough that it became part of his foundation rather than a crack in it. He had known that his birth mother had left him. He had known it was a choice she made, not a thing that happened. He had spent years, in adolescence and young adulthood, in the particular relationship with that fact that adopted children sometimes develop. Not hatred, not grief exactly, something more like a question he couldn't find the answer to because he didn't have enough of the pieces. He had become a lawyer, the way some people become things that are, in retrospect, obviously connected to the central, unresolved question of their lives. He was drawn to cases where the information mattered, where what you knew and when you knew it, and whether the record was complete, changed everything about what justice meant. He had made an exceptional prosecutor. He had been appointed to the bench at 38, the youngest in Hargrove County history, by a governor who said at the ceremony that James Aldrich had the temperament of a man who understood that the law is only as just as the people who apply it. He had a daughter named Clara, 8 years old, who he coached on Saturday mornings for a soccer league and who was, he believed, the best person he had ever met. He was good at his job. He was precise and fair and not sentimental about it in ways that occasionally frustrated defense attorneys who would have preferred sentiment but respected the precision. He had presided over 412 cases. He had sentenced people to time that had changed their lives. He had done it with the deliberateness of someone who understood what he was doing and believed it mattered to do it right. He had never lost his composure in a courtroom. Until a Thursday morning in February, when the defendant in case number 247 was a woman named Dorothy Jean Marsh, 62, no fixed address, and he looked up from the papers and saw his mother's eyes. He knew them immediately. He had not known that he knew them, had not known he had stored them, in whatever part of a person stores things from 18 months of age. But they were there, and they were hers, and the knowing was not a thought. It was earlier than thought. It was the body recognizing something before the mind had gotten there. The gavel slipped. He caught it, looked down at the papers. His heart was doing something he had no protocol for. He had protocols for almost everything that happened in his courtroom. He did not have a protocol for this. He looked up again. She was still there. Of course she was still there. She was standing at the defendant's table in a navy dress that was too large at the shoulders, and she was looking at him with an expression that he couldn't read. Not because it was unreadable, but because reading it would require him to be something other than a judge right now. And he was trying very hard to be a judge. He looked at Carter, the public defender, who was looking at him with the mild confusion of a young man who had noticed that something was happening, but didn't know what. He looked at the bailiff, who was looking at the ceiling in the way that bailiffs look at ceilings when they are waiting. He looked back at the papers. Case number 247. Defendant, Dorothy Jean Marsh. Charge, check fraud, second offense. Recommended sentencing range given prior record, 12 to 18 years. 18 years. She would be 80 before she was eligible for release. James Aldrich set the papers down. He looked at Dorothy. Dorothy looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment that stretched past what courtrooms were designed to contain. Then he said, with a steadiness that cost him more than anything he had said from that bench, "I need to declare a conflict of interest. This case will be reassigned." Carter blinked. "Your Honor?" "This case will be reassigned," James said again. "The defendant is to be remanded to county holding pending reassignment. Court is recessed." He stood. He left the bench. He walked through the door that led to his chambers and closed it behind him, and stood in the room with his hands on his desk and his eyes on the floor, and breathed. Outside, in the courtroom, Dorothy stood at the defendant's table. The bailiff was saying something to Carter. Carter was saying something back. People were gathering their things. Dorothy stood still. She was thinking about the green blanket, the tear at the corner that she had meant to mend. She was thinking that he had the same jaw as her father, Earl, who she had not thought of in years. She was thinking that he had caught the gavel, that his hands were steady even when they weren't. She thought, he grew up. She thought, of course he grew up. She thought, he grew up and he became this. She thought, I left him so he could have something I couldn't give him. She thought, he got it. The bailiff touched her elbow. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me." She went. James sat in his chambers for 11 minutes. He knew it was 11 minutes because the clock on his desk was the kind that makes a small sound at each minute, a sound he usually found useful and that he now found unbearable. He sat with his hands flat on the desk and counted the sounds and breathed and tried to locate, within the protocols and precedents and 38 years of a life lived in orderly response to difficult things, something that applied to this. There was nothing that applied to this. His judicial ethics were clear. The conflict of interest declaration was correct. He could not sentence his birth mother. He could not preside over any proceeding involving her. The case would go to Judge Patricia Holloway, who sat one courtroom over and who would handle it with the competence and fairness that she brought to everything. And Dorothy Jean Marsh would receive whatever sentence the law and the record and the guidelines prescribed. And James Aldrich would have nothing to do with it. That was the legal answer. It was the right answer. He sat with it for 11 minutes and then picked up his phone and called his wife. Caroline answered on the second ring. She was a family court attorney and was between hearings and said, "What's wrong?" before he had said anything, because she knew his silences the way a person knows a language they've been speaking for 15 years. He told her. Caroline was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Where is she now?" "County holding, pending reassignment." "Okay." A pause. "Are you okay?" "I don't know." It was the most honest thing he had said in a courtroom that day, and he wasn't even in the courtroom. "I need to think." Take the time you need, Caroline said. I'll be home by 6. We'll talk. He sat for a while longer. Then he picked up the phone again and called his public defender coordinator and arranged for Dorothy to have new counsel assigned before the end of the day. Someone senior, not a first year. He didn't explain why. He said it was a priority. Then he went back to work. He had 3 other cases that afternoon. He heard them. He was present in them. He was good at his job, and being good at his job required that he be present. So he was present. At 4:30, he drove home. Caroline had been married to James for 14 years and had learned in that time that the things he didn't say immediately were the things he needed the most time with, and that the worst thing you could do was fill the space before he was ready. She made dinner. She put Clara to bed. She came back downstairs and sat across from him at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea and waited. He told her everything, the whole of it, not just the courtroom, but what he knew of the rest, the pieces he had put together over the years from the adoption record he had finally requested at age 25, from the documents Harold and Susan had kept for him in a folder that they'd given him on his 21st birthday, and said, "This is yours. It belongs to you. You decide what you do with it." He had read the folder once. He had put it away. He had not looked at it again in 16 years. He knew her name, Dorothy Jean Marsh. He knew she had left him with a neighbor. He knew the reason listed in the file, abandonment, which was the legal word, which was not the whole word. He had spent years with the question of why, and had arrived, somewhere in his 30s, at an answer that he held with less certainty than he would have liked, that she had believed it was the only thing she could do. He didn't know if that was true. He had built it as true because building it the other way, as a woman who left because she wanted to be somewhere he wasn't, had not been survivable at certain ages. "I don't know what to do," he said to Caroline. "With the legal question, I know exactly what to do. With everything else." He stopped. Caroline wrapped both hands around her cup. "You don't have to do anything right now. She's looking at 12 to 18 years. I know. She's 62. I know that too." He was quiet for a moment. "I've given sentences like that. I've looked at records like hers, and I've seen the pattern, and I've understood what the pattern means in legal terms, and I've sentenced accordingly." He looked at his hands on the table. "And I still believe that's the right process. I still believe that the record matters, and that consistency matters, and that—" He stopped again. "But she's 62 years old, and she's been carrying whatever she's been carrying since 1984, and I keep thinking about the green blanket." "What green blanket?" "It was in the file. The neighbor's statement. She left him wrapped in a green blanket with a tear at the corner." He looked up. "She had a baby and a blanket, and she left at night, and she walked to the highway. By herself. With a plan that was going to cost her everything." He paused. "I can't stop thinking about what it took to do that. Whatever else she is, whatever she did afterward, what it took to do that one thing." Caroline was quiet for a long time. "You're not asking me whether to contact her," she said finally. "You've already decided you're going to." He looked at her. "You're asking me if that's okay," she said. He didn't answer immediately, which was an answer. "It's okay," Caroline said, "but I want to be there." The request went through the county's victim witness unit to Dorothy's new counsel, a woman named Barbara Okafor, who had 15 years of public defense experience and who received the request with the careful neutrality of someone who understood the unusual nature of what she was being asked to convey. She conveyed it to Dorothy the next morning in the holding facility's consultation room, a small space with a table bolted to the floor and a window that looked out onto a concrete wall. "Judge Aldrich has recused himself from the case, as you know," Barbara said. "He is requesting, through me, to know whether you would be willing to speak with him, voluntarily." outside the legal proceedings. He wants me to be clear that this has nothing to do with your case, that your case is now entirely in Judge Holloway's jurisdiction, and that your response to this request will have no bearing on any proceeding. Dorothy sat with her hands folded on the table. She had slept badly, which was not unusual in holding, and she looked it. She looked at Barbara for a long time. "He wants to talk to me," she said. "Yes." "Does he want to?" She stopped. "What does he want?" "He didn't specify. He said he wanted to talk." Dorothy was quiet. She had spent 39 years not looking for him. She had built the rule and kept it, and understood why she had built it, and still believed the rule was right. She had watched him in the courtroom for those few minutes before the gavel slipped, and she had thought, "He got it. He got the thing I couldn't give him. He got out of what I couldn't get out of." She had told herself, leaving that courtroom, that seeing him had been enough, that the rule still stood, that she had no right to ask for more than that one accidental minute of knowing he was real and grown and whole. She had told herself that for 18 hours. She had not entirely believed it. "Tell him yes," she said. They met in a conference room at Barbara Okafor's office on a Wednesday afternoon. Neutral ground, attorney present, Caroline sitting beside James with the quiet steadiness of someone who had decided her job was to be present without taking up more space than was hers. Dorothy had been brought by a corrections officer who waited in the hall. She was still in the clothes she'd been wearing. The navy dress was now replaced by the jail-issued things, and she looked smaller in them, which James had not thought was possible. She sat down across the table from him. For a moment, neither of them said anything. James had prepared for this the way he prepared for difficult proceedings, by thinking it through in advance, by identifying what he needed to say and in what order, by anticipating the ways it could go and having a response ready for each. He had done this at the kitchen table at 11 at night, while Caroline read nearby and Clara slept upstairs. And he had thought, "I know how to do hard conversations. This is a hard conversation. I know how to do this." He had been wrong. This was not a hard conversation in the way he knew how to do hard conversations. This was something else. He looked at Dorothy. She looked back. She had his eyes, or he had hers, which was the more accurate version, since she had been the one to have them first. "I looked at the adoption record," he said. "When I was 25, I know what's in it." Dorothy nodded. She kept her hands very still on the table. "I have some questions," he said. "I want you to know that you don't have to answer them. I'm not... This isn't..." He stopped, started again. "I'm not here to assign blame. I'm 41 years old. I had a good childhood. Harold and Susan were good parents. I'm not..." He paused again. "I don't have a verdict ready. I just have questions." Dorothy said, "Okay. Why didn't you come back?" It was the first question. It was the only question, really, that had always been underneath everything else. Dorothy looked at him for a long time. And then she told him. Not the short version. The version she might have given to a stranger, or to a caseworker, or to someone who didn't need the whole of it. She told him the whole of it. Bobby Aldrich, who had no relation to Harold and Susan, but whose name had followed James anyway, like an inheritance he hadn't known he was receiving. The house on Calloway Street. The years of doing what she'd needed to survive it. The understanding, in the fall of '84, that she was becoming someone her child should not be raised by. The 3 weeks of deciding. Ruth Kavanaugh's porch. The green blanket. "I left," she said, "because I believed it was the only way to give you something safe. And then I couldn't get clean, not for years. And by the time I was clean enough to come back, you had been somewhere for 7 years. You had a family. I checked, not your name, I didn't let myself look for your name, but I checked on the general question of the adoption, and it had been finalized years before. She paused. I had a rule that I wouldn't look for you because looking was for me, not for you. And I wasn't allowed to do things for me at your expense anymore. James was quiet for a long moment. That was my rule, Dorothy said. I kept it for 39 years. And today, he said. Today you asked, she said. That's different. I didn't come looking. She stopped. You asked. He looked at his hands on the table. His left thumb moved, slightly, the way it did when he was concentrating. Dorothy watched it. She thought, there it is. There's the thing I remembered. Did you think about me? He asked. Every day, she said, without hesitation, without performance. Every single day. I thought, I hope he's warm. I hope somebody's teaching him things. I hope he's not angry. She paused. I hope he's not angry was the one I came back to the most. James looked up. Are you? She asked. He sat with the question. I was, he said. For a long time. I was angry at someone who was more of an idea than a person. It's harder to be angry at a person. He looked at her. I'm working on it. I think that's the honest answer. Dorothy nodded. That was a fair answer. That was more than a fair answer. I'm working on it too, she said. The sentencing, when it came, was handled by Judge Patricia Holloway, who reviewed the record, considered the guidelines, heard Barbara Okafor's argument, which was thorough and carefully constructed, and which James had had nothing to do with. He had been meticulous about that. And sentenced Dorothy to 3 years probation, mandatory counseling, and community service. Not 18 years. Not 12 years. Patricia Holloway wrote in the sentencing memo that the guidelines allowed for judicial discretion in cases where the nature of the offense, the circumstances of the defendant, and the practical impact of incarceration were considered holistically. She wrote that this was such a case. Dorothy did not know, sitting at that defendant's table on a Friday morning in March, whether James had had any role in what Patricia Holloway had considered. She did not ask. She understood that asking was not something she was owed. She received the sentence with the stillness of someone who had received worse, and was not assuming this meant anything about what came next. It meant she was not going to prison. It meant she had time. What she did with time was her own responsibility. She had known that since 1984. She moved into a transitional housing program in Hargrove County, run by a nonprofit that worked with women coming out of the justice system. It was a house on a quiet street with a shared kitchen and a small yard where someone had planted tomatoes that were doing better than they deserved. She had her own room. It was the first room of her own she had had in 4 years. She got a job at a laundromat 6 blocks away. The owner was a woman named June, who had hired from the program before and who paid fairly and asked for work, which Dorothy provided. She and James had met twice more since the conference room, both times at Barbara Okafor's office because it was the place they had started, and neither of them had suggested moving somewhere else, which meant something or meant that it was simply easier. And either way, it was fine. The conversations were not easy. They were not warm, not yet. Warm was not what this was, not this early, not with this much history between them, that was not so much shared history as parallel history. Two people shaped by the same original event who had been in entirely different rooms when everything that followed happened. But they talked. He told her about Clara, the 8-year-old who was better than anyone he'd ever met. She told him about Sister Margaret in Savannah, the woman with the face like judgment and the voice like patience, who had said, "I need you to want to." He laughed at that, not at the difficulty of it, but at the precision of it, the way it exactly named the thing. She liked his laugh. It came from his father's side in shape, but from somewhere else entirely in content. She had decided that. She thought she was right. She did not tell him she loved him. It was too early for that, and she knew it, and she believed she had finally, at 62, learned enough about what was too early and why it mattered. She showed up instead. She answered his messages. She went to the office when he asked. She was present without demanding presence in return. It was what she could offer. She offered it. One afternoon in May, a package arrived at the transitional house addressed to her. Inside was a child's drawing. A house, a sun, 3 figures of varying heights in the yard. Across the bottom, in the large, careful letters of an 8-year-old, for Dorothy. Below that, in smaller handwriting that was clearly Caroline's, she asked if she could send this. We said yes. Dorothy sat on the edge of her bed with the drawing in her hands for a long time. She thought about the green blanket, the tear at the corner, the neighbor's porch in the dark, the highway she had walked to and kept walking. She thought about the gavel that had slipped and been caught. She thought, this is where 39 years goes. Not to an ending. To this. A drawing from a child who doesn't know her yet. A room of her own, a job 6 blocks away, a son who is working on it. She put the drawing on the windowsill, where the afternoon light caught it. Then she put on her shoes and went to work. There is something I want to say before we end. Dorothy's story is not a story about forgiveness. It's not a story about redemption in the easy sense of the word, the kind that arrives all at once and resolves everything. It is a story about 2 people shaped by the same beginning who found each other at the end of a very long road and decided, separately and together, that they were willing to keep going. Some things don't get fixed. Some things get carried differently by more than one person, and that is what it is. If this story stayed with you, and I believe it did, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Maybe someone who has been carrying something alone for a long time. Maybe someone who has a question they've never let themselves ask. Leave a comment and tell me what you felt when the gavel slipped. That's the moment I keep coming back to. Tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and hit like if you made it here. This channel is where I'll keep bringing you stories like Dorothy's, told with the care they deserve. Thank you for staying. Thank you for giving your time to a woman who